A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon, Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
The Haredi world recently organized a demonstration of over 300,000 participants protesting the expected passing of a law that would require that at least some Haredim serve in the army. Interestingly, certain rabbis normally affiliated with the national religious camp recommended that non-Haredi religious Jews should attend the demonstration, and in some cases they themselves participated. Does the rabbi have any comments?
First of all, I would like to tell you of my initial thoughts going back to last Friday. Today is Monday. The demonstration of which you speak took place yesterday on Sunday. And it was last Friday morning that I heard a car driving around with a loudspeaker on it, driving around our neighborhood in Yerushalayim. And this was obviously a car that had been hired by some Haredi organization. This was obvious by the way the Hebrew, the words being used were pronounced. And it was calling people to attend the demonstration the following Sunday, yesterday. One of the points that this announcement over the loudspeaker made was that this will be a tremendous occasion of Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of Hashem's name. And as soon as I heard that, I immediately asked myself, what exactly is the great Kiddush Hashem involved here? What are we talking about? And it occurred to me that, the more I thought about it, it occurred to me that in fact we may have just witnessed yesterday something very different from a Kiddush Hashem. In fact, it may well have been one of the greatest and best publicized acts of Hilul Hashem in recent memory. And I will explain exactly why I say this. The first point I wish to make is that what we are witnessing here is the nadir, the low point of the Haredi world and its rabbinic leadership. In fact, what we are witnessing is a dead end, the dead end situation in which the Haredi world, in my view, finds itself. We did not see at this demonstration, or in the days leading up to the demonstration, when there were a number of minor trial runs, so to speak, where certain smaller groups of people held placards in different places. If one looks at those placards and what they said, and if one listens to spokesmen for the Haredi world in the media, one does not hear that we understand and we accept the fact that we too must fulfill our civic obligations as citizens of Israel. We understand that we must serve in the army like everybody else, but we're not willing to do it according to the dictates and the conditions of so-and-so, whether it be Yair Lapid and his Yesh Atid party, who has been pushing this agenda, or anybody else. If they were to come along and say, we wish to serve in the army, but we wish it to be in certain closed units, for example, along the lines of the Nahal Haredi, units in the army which have been very successful by all, or certainly by most accounts, that would be one thing. If they had further demands, that could also perhaps be discussed. But the position of the Haredi world, and here this is true of both the supposedly more moderate wing of the Haredi world, certainly if we're talking about the Lithuanian Torah world, so-called, headed by Hagon Arav Steinman, or the more reactionary, more hardline wing of the Lithuanian Torah world, led by Hagon Arav Shmuel Orbach, In both cases, all camps have rejected any type, any form of military service for Haredim who are officially listed as studying in a yeshiva. I recently heard a well-known spokesman for the Lithuanian Torah world, so he describes himself, and I agree with him that he is an authentic representation of the Lithuanian Torah world. I heard this person, Rabbi Harbatal, who is also an academician and who understands the non-Haredi world quite well. He himself was not brought up in the Haredi world, but in the national religious world. He stated quite explicitly that the position of the Lithuanian Torah world is that all people, all young men, whether they are learning Torah or not, should not be drafted into the army, because the yeshiva world is essentially what was once described by another Haredi spokesman many years ago. The yeshiva world is a kind of Tevat Noach, a kind of Noah's Ark. In other words, it is a way of protecting people from the floodwaters of secularism and other negative influences of Israeli and Israeli society and societies beyond the borders of Israel. In other words, this admission is simply proof of what I have said on a number of occasions in the past, that the Haredi point of view and the Haredi philosophy is such that it has no solution. It doesn't even pretend to have a solution for the Jewish people, or even for the Haredi community per se, and for those young men, shall we say, in the Haredi world who find that they are not cut out for extended yeshiva study, for many, many years of intensive Talmudic studies, etc. What are they going to do if they do not fit into that particular box, that particular role that has been chosen for them? The Haredi world has no solution for these people, and that is why increasingly certain young Haredim are opting out of the system. But this is all being done, as it were, behind the backs of the rabbinical leadership and the political leadership. It is being done, as it were, in a private and sort of partisan fashion. And this is most unfortunate and is a clear indication of the bankruptcy of the system.
What is the problem with some people choosing to leave yeshiva?
There are two problems with opting out of learning in yeshiva. The first is on the personal level, for those individuals who choose to drop out of the yeshiva, because the system put in place by the rabbinical leadership of the Haredi world over many decades here in Israel is such that it's all or nothing. It's either you are a successful and serious Talmudic scholar sitting in yeshiva for year upon year, year after year, and this is how you essentially will lead your life, and they have mapped out your life for you in that fashion. Or it's nothing, there's no other option. They are not allowing for any other possibility. What is a young Haredi man who is perfectly serious about being Jewish and being a religious Jew and spending some time every day studying Torah, but he understands, he sees within himself that he is not cut out for 8, 12, 14 hours a day or more of Torah study, of Talmudic study, one should add, one should stress, on a daily basis for the foreseeable future and beyond. What is he supposed to do? The Haredi system does not offer any other solution and considers such a person to be a failure. They make it very clear to these people they are considered failures, who have not lived up to the standard, who are not able to toe the line. And for these individuals, what very often happens is that they drop out of Judaism altogether. It is very rare for such a young man, or for that matter, for a young woman brought up in the Haredi world who finds that this form of Judaism is not palatable for them or not possible. for them to follow. It is not at all, it is not common for these people to cease being Haredi Jews and become religious Jews, that is to say, Dati Lomi or some other form of religious Orthodox Judaism, but not Haredi. Almost without exception, these people end up dropping Judaism altogether and becoming secular, and very often very, very hardcore, rebellious and anti-religious individuals. And that is, in the first place, a great tragedy on the personal level, both for the individuals and for the families and for Klal Yisrael. On a second level, which is in some ways even more serious, we find that this misrepresentation of true, authentic Torah Judaism, the picture painted by the Haredi world that the needs, the legitimate, real-world needs of the Jewish people, which include running a state and having an army capable of defending the Jewish state and the Jewish people, these kinds of considerations are not compatible with the form of Judaism that the Haredi world presents to the entire world, to the rest of the Jewish people and to the entire world. The idea that a majority, the vast majority of any country's citizenry should be working, productive people who pay taxes and who participate in all obligations and therefore also have all the rights of any other citizen, as is normal in any country, the idea that this is incompatible with real, authentic Torah Judaism, which is of course what the Haredim claim that they live and they represent, this itself is a tremendous Hilul Hashem, because this inexorably leads people to understand, people who don't know what real Judaism is all about, this leads people to understand that real Judaism and real world existence, that life and the national existence of the Jewish people as well, are incompatible. And what greater Hilul Hashem could there be than that?
Is there anything else that the Rabbi finds problematic with the Haredi outlook?
There is also the very real and serious problem that I've always felt regarding the Haredi hashkafa or outlook or philosophy of life, and that is the very clear and obvious lack of any sense of responsibility towards the Jewish people, towards Klal Yisrael and the state of Klal Yisrael, that is to say, the state of Israel. The Haredim, when I say Haredim here, I refer to the rabbinical leadership first and foremost. The Haredim project the kind of attitude that I once heard described to me by a friend of mine who happens to have been brought up in a home which was neither Haredi nor standard national religious, somewhere in the middle, which today is very rare. And when he was brought up, and he is an older man than myself, this was perhaps less rare. And he himself dresses in Haredi garb, but he thinks a little bit differently. He's an independent thinker and a very intelligent and learned man. He once said to me that the Haredim never had any interest in the establishment of a Jewish state. And in fact, they're very pleased that there are Hilonim, that is to say, secular Jews out there, who will do all that it takes, all that is required in order to run that state, whether it is just the general running of the country in the sense of governance, whether it is military service, etc. They're very pleased that there are people who will take care of these things because this doesn't interest them and it's not something which they feel drawn to, and nor it is something which they feel any responsibility for. And this is a very unacceptable position.
What does the Rabbi mean by a lack of feeling of responsibility, and where does the Rabbi see this?
I refer to what I discern as being a total lack of what I would refer to as Klal Yisrael awareness, that is to say, a feeling of belonging and concern for Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people as a whole. I have heard Haredim, particularly Haredi spokesmen in the media, claim that they very much feel such a responsibility towards the Jewish people, and thus they explain some of their actions regarding, for example, their opposition to sham conversions to Judaism and the like. And there may be some truth in that. But it is also clear that, generally speaking, over a period of many decades, in fact over a period of at least 100 years, the ultra-Orthodox world has become so insular and cut off and essentially uninvolved in the affairs of the Jewish people as a whole, including, and perhaps particularly, the entire Zionist enterprise, that inevitably, inexorably, they have lost any real Klal Yisrael consciousness. Klal Yisrael refers to the Jewish people not just in the physical sense, but in the historical and ideological sense, both in the past and the present and in the future as well. When the Haredi world is asked, why do you not feel that it's your responsibility to participate in what is required for the Jewish people's welfare and defense, etc., they really don't understand the question, because they wish to live Judaism as they understand their forefathers to have lived Judaism in the Galuth, in the ghettos, in other historical times and places. And they don't understand why they, as Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, should be required to do things that their Haredi brethren in North America or Europe or Australia are not required to do. It just doesn't make any sense to them that anyone should come to them with any such a demand. And therefore, when they are told that you are required to serve in the army, as everybody else is required to serve in the army, they don't see this as a legitimate claim or a reasonable demand. Instead, what the Haredi world hears and perceives is a replay of the Cantonist policy of enforced conscription of young Jews in Tsarist Russia under Nikolai I, who came to power in Russia in 1825, and starting in 1827, the official government policy was to conscript into army schools all Jewish boys from the age of 12 for 6 years of schooling up to the age of 18, and from that time on they were required to serve a further 25 years in the Russian army. And this was part of a deliberate policy on the part of Nikolai I, who happened to have been a very devout Christian. This was a part of a deliberate policy on his part to convert the Jews to Christianity and to essentially eliminate this bothersome ethnic group within the Russian Empire. And many people in the Haredi world, many of their spokesmen, are using exactly the same slogans of Gzerat Shmad, which means a deliberate policy intended to cut Jews off from their Jewishness and their Jewish lifestyle. They're using precisely that language which was used quite justifiably in Tsarist Russia.
The Rabbi has expressed a rather strong condemnation of the Haredi world. On what does the Rabbi base the claim that the Haredi world lacks Klal Yisrael consciousness?
That's a very fair question, and I would like to share with you something that I saw just a few days ago, this past Friday, in the Makor Rishon newspaper here in Israel. Here is last Friday's edition of Makor Rishon. The date is Kaf Het Badar Aleph Tafshin Ayin Dala, the 28th of February 2014. On page 6, there are a number of articles regarding this discussion of the law that is about to be passed, apparently, regarding Haredi participation in the army, etc. And we find two statements. I will read very briefly in Hebrew and translate. B'hasidut be'elz ma'imim, nahager b'hamonenu miha'aretz. Translation. The first item here, and I point to it for you if you wish to see, refers to the fact that the Hasidic sect of Belz announced that if such a law is passed, they will immediately begin a concerted and well-organized effort, which they claim has already been put in place. The first steps have already been taken, according to this article, in order to facilitate the emigration of their Hasidim, their Hasidic followers from Israel to other countries, particularly, apparently, to the United States. This is a very strange claim or response on the part of the Haredi world, or part of the Haredi world, which has actually been mentioned by other sectors of the Haredi world. I recall hearing similar statements made by, for example, Haver Knesset Meir Porush, member of Knesset of the Agudat Yisrael party, who is not at all from the Belz Hasidic sect. I remember him saying quite clearly on more than one occasion that if we are not allowed to continue with our lifestyle as we have been doing for some decades now in Israel, we will simply pick up and leave Israel and move elsewhere. This kind of response to the very legitimate demand that the Haredi population of the country begins to pull its weight and be responsible citizens of the state of Israel, and be people who feel responsibility towards their fellow Jews and to their nation, the response that we will pick up and leave is not at all an indication of any kind of Klal Yisrael consciousness. In fact, it is basically proof that they have no understanding of what Klal Yisrael is all about. They believe, apparently, that even if it were possible, and I don't really believe it is possible, that large numbers of them were to emigrate to foreign countries and leave our homeland, they seem to believe that this would be the ideal solution to their problems, so to speak. But in fact, they don't understand that moving to a foreign country and leaving their homeland, leaving the Jewish nation's homeland as promised to us in the Torah, and that homeland which has been the focus of our lives, our national lives and aspirations for the last 3,500 years, they don't seem to understand that itself would be the problem. That would be the biggest problem, picking up and leaving the country. That is one clear example. Another example is even more stunning, I think, and that is the article that appears immediately below that, over here, where it says as follows, that the member of Knesset, Moshe Gafni, of the Degel Torah party, says as follows: Gafni Ma'ayem, this member of Knesset, threatens as follows: Ed'ag lisgor et yeshivot ha'esder v'la'atzor et taktiv ha'atyashvut. He threatens in no uncertain terms that as soon as he is able, politically speaking, as soon as he finds himself once again in a position of power, at the present time he is not part of the coalition, he is part of the opposition, and therefore is in no position to do anything almost at all. But he says, he promises, he threatens that when I am able, when I am somehow in the future, in a future political constellation, in a position to do so, I will personally ensure that all funding for the Hesder Yeshivot will be shut off, so the Hesder Yeshivot will have to close, and I will shut off all funding and any monies transferred to Israeli towns and villages in Yudan and Shomron, the Hityashvuyot. Again, we hear and we see plainly how in the Haredi mind, their personal lives, their communal lives, the way they have been living their lives for many decades now, they have been allowed to, and they should never have happened, but it has happened. It was allowed to take place for many decades here in Israel. They were allowed to live in some kind of virtual reality where they were not required to pull their weight, when they were not required to act as responsible members of Klal Yisrael. Now, if you try and insist that this now becomes the case, I will make it my business to shut down the yeshivot where the members of my community do not study, that is to say yeshivot hesder, which are yeshivot where the students both serve in the army and study Torah. These are institutions that have been universally praised for the last 50 years, 60 years since they were established, both in the army and in all sectors of Israeli society. And I will make sure that the settlements of Jews, the villages and towns full of Jews in Yudan Shamron, in those areas beyond the official borders of the State of Israel at present, will be starved of funding, and therefore they will be, their continued existence will be placed in jeopardy. What sort of response to a very legitimate demand that Haredi Judaism begins to get real and join the real world after convincing themselves that they are still living in the ghettos of Minsk or other places in Eastern Europe? What kind of response is that? What kind of responsibility and care for other Jews and for Klal Yisrael as a whole, for the Jewish nation and their hold on their homeland and the study of Torah in yeshivot, which don't happen to be their yeshivot? What kind of response is that? What kind of attitude towards other Jews, and what kind of attitude and understanding of the Jewish people's purpose and national existence in the present and in the future does that bespeak? In conclusion, I would like to add one more thing regarding the rabbis and certain individuals from the national religious world who participated in this very dubious demonstration yesterday. It seems that many national religious people are informed by a sense of inferiority when it comes to the Haredi world. Whenever the Haredi world makes a move or makes a statement that says everyone who believes in Torah has to think this or has to do that, they immediately jump to attention and run off and do as the Haredim would like to see everybody do. They are, here again, they are expressing clearly a great lack of vision and lack of clarity as to what the national religious, so-called Dati Leumi position is regarding this question of national service in the army, other forms of national service, and in general creating a more normalized situation for the Haredi community in Israel. That is to say, a situation where most people go to work like everybody else and pay taxes and are productive citizens. One does not hear, unfortunately, any clear statement from the religious world that is not Haredi. What is their position? What is their understanding? What is their outlook? How should these things be arranged? What is the correct balance between the study of Torah and military service, etc.? Instead of delving into these questions and making their position clear for all to hear, both for the Haredim and the secular Jews to hear, instead some of these religious Jews choose to somehow co-opt themselves into the Haredi world, into the Haredi position, without making it plain really what their position is, and this simply adds further confusion and adds to the lack of self-identity and understanding within the ranks of the religious world as to what the Torah truly states and directs us to think and to do regarding these issues. And this is also a very tragic and unfortunate development. What the Torah world, the Torah world which is not Haredi, should be doing is not kowtowing to the Haredi ideology or the cries of despair, which are very much staged, I must add, which we hear emanating from the Haredi ranks. What the Torah world, which is not Haredi, should be doing is engaging the Haredi world, debating them, explaining to them why their version of Judaism is simply not correct, it is not authentic, and it is a very clear and very serious misrepresentation of what Torah Yisrael is all about. And the Jewish people must know what the Torah truly thinks about these issues. And therefore what we need to do is not to participate in such a expression of the situation in which Haredi Judaism finds itself, that is to say, the dead end to which they have driven themselves to. We have to show them how to turn around, make that U-turn, and drive out of that one-way street with a dead end at one end, show them how to drive out and move back into the mainstream, into the true and authentic expression of Torah Judaism in the present age.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.